Have you ever imagined a billionaire heiress stepping onto a flight only to face humiliation and prejudice? Alana Brooks, disguised in simplicity, becomes the center of unwarranted judgment from a flight attendant, a pilot, and even the check-in staff. But when her true identity is revealed, the entire crew is left stunned. What will happen next? Don't miss this powerful story of justice and transformation. Alana Brooks stepped into the check-in area at New York International Airport, clutching her first-class ticket firmly. She was dressed simply in a light blue dress and flat shoes, yet her elegant demeanor betrayed an undeniable confidence. The morning light reflected off the delicate gold watch on her wrist, accentuating the subtle sophistication of her presence. Greg Bennett, the check-in agent, glanced up as Alana approached. His eyes shifted from her ticket to her face, then paused with a skeptical frown. "Are you sure this ticket is yours?" he asked, his tone dry and curt. Alana didn't flinch at his attitude. She offered him a calm smile, handing over her ticket without hesitation. Greg took it, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, as if searching for something amiss. A second later, he let out a faint scoff. First class is getting easier to buy these days. Just then, Susan White, the lead flight attendant for Alana's flight, walked by. A faint smirk appeared on Susan's face as she overheard Greg's comment. She glanced briefly at Alana, her eyes brimming with thinly veiled contempt. While waiting for the check-in process to finish, Alana could hear the whispers around her. "Look at her, probably a free upgrade." "Exactly. Doesn't look like she belongs in first class." The murmurs didn't faze her. Alana stood tall, her posture exuding a quiet poise. It was clear she was no stranger to such judgmental stares and disparaging remarks. At the boarding gate, Alana encountered Susan again. When she handed over her ticket, Susan gave it a cursory glance before speaking with barely concealed skepticism. "Your seat's in first class? Really?" "Yes," Alana replied, her tone steady and composed. Susan shrugged, handed the ticket back, and turned to whisper to a colleague nearby, loud enough for Alana to catch. "Someone like her in first class? Hard to believe." Without saying another word, Alana stepped into the plane, leaving behind the murmurs and prejudiced glances. Her silence carried the weight of a powerful rebuttal, stronger than any words could ever be. As Alana stepped into the first-class cabin, she could feel the weight of the other passengers' gazes. It was as if everyone was silently questioning why she was there. A few murmurs broke the silence, accompanied by soft, stifled laughter that only heightened the stifling atmosphere. Alana placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat. The cream leather upholstery, the spaciousness of her surroundings, and the carefully crafted luxury all seemed to underline the exclusivity of the space. Yet, none of it brought her comfort. She was all too familiar with being judged based solely on appearances. Across the cabin, Susan White stood at the service station, chatting quietly with a colleague. The two glanced intermittently in Alana's direction, their whispers accompanied by suppressed giggles. Susan, clearly intending to be overheard, raised her voice just enough to carry across the cabin. "Some people think that just paying for a seat makes them belong here. But take a closer look. Poise isn't something you can buy." A middle-aged man seated nearby gave a subtle nod of agreement. He cast a scrutinizing glance at Alana before turning to his newspaper, a faintly smug smile playing on his lips. Alana remained unfazed. She reached into her bag, pulled out a book, and immersed herself in its pages, choosing to focus on the written words rather than the palpable prejudice surrounding her. She had always believed that God had given her a unique gift, the ability to remain calm in the face of adversity. But her patience was soon tested. A passenger from the economy cabin approached, evidently searching for space to stow his luggage. He was a tall, weary-looking man, and his hesitation was clear as he noticed Alana seated nearby. Finally, he asked tentatively, "Excuse me, would it be all right if I place my bag here? The compartments in the back are full." Before Alana could respond, Susan appeared beside him, her tone brisk and unyielding. "No, you may not. This space is reserved for first-class passengers." The man looked momentarily flustered but nodded an apology and began to walk away. Susan turned to Alana, a faint smirk on her face. First class has its standards. Not everyone belongs. A wave of irritation surged within Alana, but she drew a deep breath to steady herself. Her father, Nathan Brooks, had always taught her that silence could be more powerful than words. "Can I get you anything?" Susan asked, her voice dripping with mock politeness as she faced Alana again. Alana looked up, her expression calm but piercing. "No, thank you," she replied simply, her tone revealing nothing. Susan shrugged and walked away without another word, though something in Alana's unwavering gaze seemed to unsettle her. The flight had yet to take off, but it had already presented Alana with its first challenges. Even so, she refused to let these moments of prejudice shake her resolve. Closing her eyes, she silently prayed for strength, trusting that God would guide her through every difficulty. The plane finally took off. Alana gazed out the window, watching the fluffy white clouds drift by, creating a serene expanse that stood in stark contrast to the tension she was enduring. She tried to relax, but the scrutinizing glances and whispered remarks around her made it difficult to ignore the atmosphere. As the flight attendants began serving drinks, Susan White appeared with a tray of red wine in hand. Her once professional smile had been replaced by a frosty expression. "Would you like red or white wine?" Susan asked, her voice deliberately drawn out, as if teasing. "Just water, please," Alana replied, her tone calm and measured. Susan placed a glass of water on the tray table in front of her, the movement deliberately abrupt. A few drops spilled over, landing on the edge of Alana's dress. "Oh, so sorry," Susan said, her words devoid of any genuine apology. Alana inhaled deeply, refusing to react. Moments like these always brought her father's words to mind. Never let anyone pull you down from the place God has destined for you. Be patient, for your worth is unshakable. She gently wiped the water from her dress, her gaze steady and composed. The lack of reaction seemed to unsettle Susan, who turned and walked away toward the service station, casting one last look over her shoulder. Not long after, the middle-aged man seated nearby, the same one who had earlier regarded Alana with disdain, suddenly spoke up. "Who are you? Why are you sitting here?" he asked bluntly, his tone laced with suspicion. Alana looked up, her eyes brimming with quiet confidence. "I'm sitting here because I purchased a first-class ticket just like you," she said simply, her words sharp yet composed. The man hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. He mumbled something under his breath and turned away, seemingly unwilling to meet her steady gaze any longer. Moments later, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Henry Miller. We're about to encounter some light turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts." The plane shook gently, prompting passengers to grip their seats. Alana closed her eyes, her hands tightening around her seatbelt. Silently, she prayed, placing all her trust in God. She believed that no matter the storm, He would guide her safely through. As the turbulence subsided, a wave of peace washed over Alana. The judgmental stares and murmurs around her seemed to fade into insignificance. What mattered was that she had held onto her dignity and her faith. Opening her eyes, Alana fixed her gaze straight ahead. This flight was not merely a physical journey. For her, it was a testament to her worth. A journey she believed God had ordained to teach her deeper lessons about patience and forgiveness. Alana stepped into the first-class cabin, a mix of unease and curiosity washing over her. The space was lavishly adorned with plush leather seats, warm golden lighting, and the subdued murmurs of wealthy passengers. Yet the moment she appeared, every gaze seemed to fix on her, as if she had accidentally wandered into a place where she didn't belong. She took a deep breath, maintaining an outward calm, and made her way to her seat, a window seat, perfectly positioned for a view of the clouds below. But as she settled in, she couldn't ignore the subtle glances of curiosity and judgment from those around her. Beside her, a middle-aged woman dressed in a designer outfit leaned toward the man seated next to her, whispering something before both cast a pointed glance in Alana's direction. Alana didn't need to hear the words to understand they were talking about her. A few moments later, Captain Henry Miller entered the cabin, his movements deliberate and exuding authority. His eyes scanned the passengers, seemingly assessing the atmosphere and ensuring the flight's smooth operation. When his gaze landed on Alana, a slight frown creased his brow. Turning to Susan, the lead flight attendant standing nearby, Henry lowered his voice just enough for Alana to overhear. "Who is she?" Susan shrugged, her lips curling into a faintly derisive smile. "Probably someone lucky enough to score a free ticket." Henry nodded, though the displeasure on his face was unmistakable. "If there's any trouble, let me know. We don't need any issues on this flight." His words seemed to weigh heavily in the air, adding a layer of tension to the cabin. Susan followed his gaze toward Alana before turning back with a quick glance, her eyes sharp with silent judgment. Alana remained silent, her fingers tightening slightly around the armrest of her seat. She could feel the unspoken hostility surrounding her, but she had no intention of letting it deter her. The intercom crackled to life, announcing that the plane was preparing for takeoff. Alana secured her seatbelt, focusing her attention on the view outside the window and attempting to ignore the murmurs around her. Yet the whispered comment from the woman nearby reached her ears. "I can't imagine why someone like her would be sitting here." Alana turned her head, her gaze meeting the woman's with calm, unwavering strength. Instead of responding, she offered a polite smile and then turned away, shifting her focus back to the window. The plane began to taxi down the runway, its engines humming beneath her feet. Alana felt the faint vibrations as the aircraft prepared to lift off, a reminder that she was here, seated in first class, no matter what anyone else thought. The plane had leveled at cruising altitude, but the tension in the first-class cabin lingered. Alana tried to focus on the serene expanse of sky outside her window, yet the hushed whispers around her seemed to press in from all directions. A flight attendant wheeled a service cart down the aisle, his tray laden with drinks. When he reached Alana's seat, he didn't so much as glance at her. "Excuse me, may I have a cup of tea?" Alana asked, her voice gentle yet clear. The attendant paused for a moment, raising an eyebrow as if surprised that she dared to speak. "I'll get back to you," he replied curtly before moving on to serve another passenger. But even after finishing his rounds, he never returned. Alana sighed softly and reached in her bag to retrieve a book. Before she could open it, Susan, the lead flight attendant, approached with a tray of coffee. Stopping near Alana, she leaned conspicuously over her to serve the passenger behind her. And then, as though by accident, Susan spilled an entire cup of hot coffee onto Alana's shirt. Alana jerked upright, startled, as the scalding liquid soaked through her blouse, leaving a dark, wet stain. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Susan said, though her tone lacked any genuine remorse. "I didn't mean to." Alana met Susan's gaze, her expression calm but piercing. "It's fine. Everyone makes mistakes," she replied evenly. Susan shrugged, her smile a mask of false politeness, and walked away. Around them, a few passengers turned to stare at Alana, but none spoke up. Some even smirked faintly, as though complicit in the silent judgment. Alana eased back into her seat, dabbing at her shirt with a napkin. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed. She knew this wasn't an accident, but she also understood that anger would only escalate the situation. From nearby, the middle-aged woman who had earlier whispered about Alana leaned over, her voice deliberately louder than necessary. "Unfortunate, isn't it? But maybe you're just not used to spaces like this." Alana turned to her with a faint smile. "Perhaps not, but I'm a quick learner." Her reply silenced the woman, whose eyes flickered with discomfort. Yet for Alana, such attitudes were all too familiar. She knew that breaking through prejudice often required more than defiance. It demanded patience and unwavering resolve. At that moment, Captain Henry Miller entered the cabin for another inspection. His gaze landed on Alana's stained shirt, and his brow furrowed briefly. He exchanged a quick look with Susan, but said nothing before heading back to the cockpit. Alana leaned back against her seat, her gaze fixed on the long streaks of cloud visible through the window. Though she had been treated unfairly, she didn't feel defeated. On the contrary, her determination to prove her worth only grew stronger, solidifying her resolve to rise above the disdain around her. The hours dragged on in the first-class cabin. Alana sat quietly, her focus fixed on the book in her hands, though the oppressive sense of isolation around her made it nearly impossible to concentrate. The scrutinizing gazes of the other passengers turned the serene atmosphere into one of stifling judgment. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, his wrist adorned with a gleaming gold watch, cast a disapproving glance in Alana's direction. After a few moments, he pressed the call button, summoning Susan, the lead flight attendant. "Miss," he said, his voice loud enough for Alana to hear, "I'd like to change my seat. I'm not accustomed to sitting near people like this." Susan glanced briefly at Alana, her professional smile barely masking her disdain. "Of course, sir. Let me see what I can do," she replied. Alana met the man's gaze steadily, but chose not to respond. She understood that any reaction would only feed into his prejudices. Instead, she reminded herself to remain calm. She was here for something far greater than herself. A few moments later, Susan returned and whispered something to the man. He stood, throwing one last glance in Alana's direction before moving to a seat farther away. Though the incident appeared to end there, the murmurs it sparked spread through the cabin like wildfire. "She must have gotten a discount ticket," an older woman whispered to her husband, her voice loud enough for Alana to hear. "Definitely. There's no way someone like her could afford first class," he replied. The words cut like an invisible blade, but Alana maintained her composure. She set her book down, her gaze drifting to the endless stretch of clouds outside the window. The vast expanse seemed to call to her, reminding her to rise above the barriers placed in her path. The service cart rolled by again, yet once more the attendants bypassed her as though she were invisible. Lennox, a young passenger seated a few rows away, had been watching the events unfold. He stood abruptly and approached the cart, his voice loud enough to fill the cabin. "She's been waiting for her tea since the beginning of this flight. Why are you ignoring her?" His question hung in the air, silencing the murmurs. The attendant froze, fumbling for an explanation. There must have been a mix-up. I'll get her tea right away." Alana met Lennox's gaze with quiet gratitude, her voice soft yet firm. "Thank you, but there's no need to make a scene." Lennox smiled. "Sometimes it's the small things that matter. Ignoring them only lets the wrong behavior continue." His words gave Alana pause. She realized he was right. Change often began with refusing to accept even the smallest injustices. Not everyone shared Lennox's sentiment. A nearby passenger shook his head, muttering to his seatmate, young and hot-headed, "It's such a small issue. Was that really necessary?" Alana drew in a deep breath, silently thankful for Lennox's courage. She also understood that deeply ingrained biases wouldn't dissolve overnight. Henry Miller, the captain, entered the cabin once more. His sharp eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Alana's stained blouse before he returned to the cockpit without a word. His silence only added to the unspoken tension in the cabin. Alana reminded herself that she couldn't control what others thought of her, but she could control how she responded. Determination blossomed within her. She was here not to appease anyone, but to affirm her right to exist in any space she chose. She smoothed her now dry shirt, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The endless sky outside the window beckoned, a gentle reminder that no limit was insurmountable. Alana remained seated, but within her, a quiet storm was building. Every scrutinizing glance, every veiled comment, and every display of indifference from those around her only solidified her resolve. This was why she needed to stand up for change. The plane's engine softened as it reached cruising altitude. Alana gazed out the window at the vast expanse of blue sky and endless clouds. She felt like the plane itself, forced to overcome immense pressure to ascend to a place of calm and stability. Susan, the lead flight attendant, reappeared, her expression unreadable. As she walked past Alana's seat, Her glance barely acknowledged her presence. But this time, Alana decided to speak up. "Excuse me, Miss Susan," she said evenly. "May I have a cup of tea, please?" Susan paused, her expression cool and detached. "Of course," she replied curtly. The words were polite enough, but the way she placed the cup on Alana's tray, without making eye contact or offering any further acknowledgement, betrayed her true intent. Alana refused to be perturbed. She sipped her tea, her demeanor calm but resolute. She understood that anger would only validate those who sought to provoke her. Instead, she focused on maintaining her dignity. In the stillness of the moment, Alana recalled her father's words. "You can't change how others see you, but you can change how you respond to them. Don't let anger define you. Let your strength do that." The memory fortified her. She straightened her posture, a faint smile playing on her lips, and reminded herself, "I'm here to prove that everyone deserves to exist and thrive, no matter where they come from." Nearby, Lennox, the young man who had defended Alana earlier, passed by her seat. He paused briefly and leaned in, his voice low. "Are you okay?" Alana met his gaze, her smile warm but steadfast. "Thank you. I'm fine, but I think this is just the beginning." Lennox raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but he didn't press her further. Instead, he nodded and walked on, her words lingering in his mind. For the rest of the flight, the hostile stares persisted, but Alana no longer let them affect her. She read her book, jotted notes in her journal, and occasionally glanced out the window. Every action, every quiet moment of composure, was her unspoken declaration that she belonged here, regardless of anyone else's opinion. As the plane landed, Alana rose from her seat, smoothing out her blouse. Walking out of the first-class cabin, she held her head high, her gaze steady and focused ahead. Some passengers paused, seemingly expecting a reaction or a sign of vulnerability, but Alana offered none. Before leaving the airport, Alana stopped at an information desk and picked up a comment card. With careful precision, she wrote, "Remember, every small action matters. A glance, a smile, or a veiled comment has the power to harm or to uplift. We all have dreams, and we all deserve to be treated with respect." She signed her name, folded the card, and slipped it into the suggestion box. For her, this journey was far more than just a flight. It was a testament to the unyielding value of human dignity, which no amount of disdainful looks could diminish. After the tense flight, Alana stepped into the baggage claim area at Los Angeles Airport. She stood by the conveyor belt, her eyes scanning the crowd without really focusing. The echoes of what had happened during the flight still lingered in her mind. Not far away, Greg Bennett, Susan White, and Henry Miller stood chatting. They laughed and spoke casually, as if nothing had gone wrong. Greg, his tone smug, recounted the events. "She didn't say a word when I moved the other passenger. I think I handled it perfectly." Susan chuckled, throwing a glance in Alana's direction. "Exactly. I told you people like her don't belong in first class." Henry stayed silent, his expression neutral, though his demeanor suggested he didn't disagree with Greg and Susan's words. But their carefree atmosphere was abruptly disrupted. A group of individuals dressed in sharp, professional attire entered the baggage claim area. Leading them was Michael Davis, the airline CEO, accompanied by several senior executives. Their presence immediately commanded attention. Michael, exuding a composed yet authoritative air, walked directly to where Alana stood. Stopping in front of her, he inclined his head respectfully and spoke in a tone of genuine regard. "Welcome, Ms. Alana Brooks. It's an honor to have you here." Michael's words resonated through the room, halting all activity. Greg, Susan, and Henry, along with everyone else nearby, turned to stare at Alana, their faces registering disbelief. Greg frowned, his confusion evident. He leaned towards Susan and whispered, "Who is she?" Susan shook her head, her wide eyes fixed on Michael and Alana. She couldn't reconcile the image of the woman they had dismissed with the deference being shown to her now. Michael Davis stepped aside, turning to address the room. His voice was firm, carrying an air of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Ms. Alana Brooks, the largest shareholder of our company." His words struck like a thunderclap, leaving the room stunned. A few staff members whispered amongst themselves, attempting to connect the composed woman before them with the title she now carried. But Michael wasn't finished. He continued, his voice ringing with pride. Ms. Alana Brooks is the daughter of Nathan Brooks, renowned philanthropist and billionaire. The Brooks family has played an instrumental role in the growth and success of this airline for many years. Greg's face went pale. He took a small step back, trying to swallow the growing panic inside him. Susan, who had always exuded confidence and authority, suddenly seemed unsteady. She glanced at Greg, her expression mirroring his shock, but neither could find the words to speak. Henry Miller, usually composed and stoic, was equally stunned. He stood rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on Alana, unable to look away. Alana remained standing, her posture poised, her eyes calm yet piercing. In this moment, she realized that her silence throughout the flight had not been a sign of weakness. It had been the most powerful statement she could make. Michael Davis, with the seasoned poise of a veteran leader, stepped closer to Alana, his demeanor composed and respectful. He offered her a polite nod before turning to address Greg, Susan, Henry, and everyone else present in the baggage claim area. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael began, his voice clear and commanding. It is my great honor today to introduce you to a very special guest. This is Ms. Alana Brooks, the largest shareholder of our company. The room fell silent for a brief moment, only to be disrupted by a ripple of murmurs. Some employees exchanged astonished glances, whispering among themselves about Alana's identity. Greg Bennett felt a chill run through him, his entire body stiffening. His wide eyes darted between Michael and Alana, disbelief etched across his face. The largest shareholder? He muttered, his voice hoarse. Susan White, who had always exuded an air of authority and confidence, now appeared unsteady and lost. She clenched her hands, struggling to maintain her composure, but the flush of embarrassment on her face betrayed her inner turmoil. Michael continued, his words deliberate and weighty, as though ensuring everyone grasped Alana's significance. Ms. Alana Brooks is not only the largest shareholder, but also the daughter of Nathan Brooks, renowned philanthropist and billionaire. The Brooks family has been a steadfast partner in the success of this airline for over 2 decades, contributing immensely to our growth and legacy. Henry Miller stood frozen, his gaze fixed on Alana. The weight of surprise and guilt settled over him as he replayed his dismissive behavior on the flight. He now realized how profoundly he had erred. Alana remained composed, her calm gaze moving across the crowd. She neither smiled nor spoke, yet the quiet strength in her demeanor was more powerful than any words she could have said. Her silence only deepened the discomfort in those who had wronged her. Greg stammered, "She's the largest shareholder? That can't be." Susan edged closer to him and hissed through clenched teeth, "Shut up, Greg. We're in deep trouble." Michael's words not only shocked those present, but also forced them to confront how they had treated Alana during the flight. Some employees bowed their heads in shame, while passengers who had shared the first-class cabin with her fidgeted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. Taking a step closer to Alana, Michael spoke again, his voice imbued with respect. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of the entire company, I want to express our deepest gratitude to your family. Your contributions have not only propelled this company to new heights, but have also cemented values of sustainability and progress within the aviation industry." Alana inclined her head slightly, her eyes steady but devoid of pride. Instead, she carried herself with quiet humility, allowing Michael's words to stand on their own. Meanwhile, Greg and Susan stood as though rooted to the floor. Greg, who had once reveled in his condescending treatment of Alana, now seemed desperate to disappear. He muttered something incoherent, avoiding everyone's gaze. Susan, her usual arrogance dissolved, tried to maintain her composure, though her trembling hands betrayed her unease. Michael continued introducing Alana to those nearby, ensuring that her role and contributions were fully recognized. Even as he spoke, he kept a close watch on the expressions of Greg, Susan, and Henry, clearly noting the need for a conversation about their conduct. A wave of guilt washed over the three of them. They couldn't ignore the stark reality that their behavior on the flight hadn't just disrespected Alana. It had betrayed the core values their company stood for: respect and equality. Alana allowed herself a faint smile, but she refrained from exploiting the moment to demean those who had mistreated her. Instead, she remained composed and gracious. To her, the truth was already loud enough. Alana took a step forward, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. The eyes fixed on her no longer held disdain or doubt, but rather a mix of confusion and newfound respect. Yet, the oppressive air in the room, the remnants of long-standing prejudice, remained palpable, a weight that could not be lifted by a mere introduction. She drew in a deep breath, her voice steady and commanding. What I experienced today was not just a personal affront. It is a symptom of a larger issue, one that countless others like me endure every day. The room fell silent. Greg Bennett stood frozen, his expression a mask of panic as Alana's words hit home. Susan White clasped her hands tightly, her usual confidence evaporating, leaving only unease. Henry Miller stared at the floor, as if willing himself to disappear from the unfolding reckoning. Alana continued, her words striking like precise arrows at the heart of the issue. When I boarded that flight, I was judged from the moment I stepped into the cabin. No one asked who I was or what I could contribute. They simply looked at me and made their conclusions, rooted in biases they've carried without question. She paused, her piercing gaze locking onto Greg and Susan. Her tone was measured but powerful. But the saddest part isn't what I endured. The saddest part is knowing that this isn't the first time and it won't be the last. How many others, without the privilege or platform to speak up, have suffered the same indignities that I did today? Her words weighed heavy in the air, compelling many to bow their heads. The gravity of her message was undeniable, leaving an indelible mark on those present. Michael Davis, standing beside her, nodded in agreement with every word. His expression was resolute as he glanced at the senior executives flanking him, silently conveying that this was a matter demanding their full attention. Alana stepped closer, her focus returning to Greg and Susan. Her voice dropped to a deliberate, cutting cadence. I don't need an apology from anyone, because an apology without genuine change is nothing but empty words. Greg's throat felt parched. He stammered, Ms. Brooks, Alana raised a hand, silencing him. I don't need your excuses. What I hope is that from today, you will think differently about how you view and treat others. Susan wavered, taking an unsteady step back, her usual composure shattered. She avoided Alana's gaze entirely, her head bowed in silent acknowledgement of her actions. The passengers and staff gathered in the baggage claim area stood motionless, watching the scene unfold. They weren't merely witnessing a reprimand. They were bearing witness to a seismic shift, one that rippled through the room like an unspoken challenge to be better. Turning to Michael Davis, Alana's eyes radiated determination. This company has achieved great things, but if we cannot ensure that every customer, no matter who they are, is treated with respect, then all those achievements will be rendered meaningless. Michael nodded solemnly, his voice reflective yet firm. You're absolutely right, and I give you my word that we will do everything in our power to bring about real change. No one should have to endure what you did. Alana acknowledged his response with a small nod, choosing not to say more. Her eyes held no malice or bitterness, only an unyielding resolve to challenge and dismantle the inequities she had faced. Greg, Susan, and Henry stood silently, absorbing the gravity of the moment. They weren't merely being scolded, they were being offered a chance to learn and transform. As Alana stepped back, yielding the floor to Michael Davis, her presence lingered. The weight of her words remained, a poignant reminder that her experience was not an isolated incident, but a call to action for everyone present. Though she said no more, the room was forever marked by her courage and conviction, an unforgettable testament to the power of speaking truth in the face of prejudice. After Alana's powerful speech, Michael Davis stepped forward, his face reflecting solemnity and accountability. His gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on each employee, including Greg Bennett, Susan White, and Henry Miller. "What Ms. Alana Brooks has said is not merely a reminder," Michael began, his voice steady and resolute. "It is a wake-up call, and it is our responsibility, mine and yours, to ensure that this never happens again." Turning to his team of executives, he continued, "I am officially launching an internal review of all service protocols within the airline. Every employee, from pilots to flight attendants, will undergo comprehensive retraining on respect and equity in customer service." His words sent a ripple through the room. Employees exchanged glances, some bowing their heads in discomfort, as though Michael's words had struck a nerve. Greg and Susan stood frozen, too ashamed to protest or even move. Michael then turned his focus back to Alana. "I deeply apologize for what you endured today. I cannot undo the past, but I promise to do everything within my power to shape a better future. We are profoundly grateful for your and your family's contributions to this company. But more than that, I am humbled by your strength and patience." Alana nodded, her expression calm yet meaningful. She knew this commitment was necessary, but it was not sufficient. Real change required concrete actions. Greg Bennett finally mustered the courage to step forward. His head bowed, his voice barely audible. I want to apologize, Ms. Brooks. I was wrong, and I promise to change." Alana studied Greg in silence for a moment before responding, her tone gentle but firm. "Mr. Bennett, your apology will only hold weight if accompanied by action. I hope you change, not just for me, but for every other customer who walks into this airline." Greg nodded, his face flushed with shame. Susan White stepped forward next, her eyes filled with remorse. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I have no excuses. I acted wrongly, and I deeply regret it." Alana regarded Susan for a long moment before replying. "I hope that next time you encounter someone like me, you will treat them as someone deserving of respect. It will not only be better for them, but also for you." Henry Miller, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "I share in this responsibility. As a pilot, it is my duty to ensure that every passenger feels safe and respected. But I failed to do that. I am sorry." Alana gave a slight nod before addressing the room. "Change is never easy, but it must begin with acknowledging our mistakes. From today, I hope all of us strive to do better." Michael Davis turned to face the gathered crowd once more, his voice rising with conviction. "We will not stop at words. I commit to ensuring that every policy of this airline is reviewed and revised to create a truly fair and respectful environment for everyone." The weight of his words hung in the air, a promise of transformation and a challenge to every individual in the room. Alana's calm strength and the candid apologies of those who wronged her marked the beginning of a pivotal shift, a moment that would resonate far beyond this one encounter. The atmosphere in the baggage claim area felt frozen in time. Michael Davis stepped into the center of the crowd, his sharp gaze carrying the weight of responsibility. As CEO, he understood that it was his duty to confront what had happened and provide solutions worthy of the situation. Stopping in front of Alana, Michael gave a slight bow, a personal gesture of apology, before addressing the gathered employees and passengers. His voice rang out clearly, every word imbued with gravity. "Ms. Alana Brooks and everyone present, I want to offer my deepest apologies for what Ms. Brooks endured on today's flight. These actions are entirely contrary to the core values of our airline, an airline committed to delivering respect and fairness to every customer." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Greg Bennett, Susan White, and Henry Miller, whose roles in the incident were undeniable. All three stood with heads bowed, avoiding his or Alana's gaze. "We will not take this matter lightly," Michael continued. "Effective immediately, we are launching a full internal investigation to uncover all the details of what occurred. Those involved will be held accountable for their actions, and we commit to a zero-tolerance policy for any form of discrimination." His words echoed through the room, casting a hush over the crowd. Some employees looked uneasy, while passengers who had witnessed the incident nodded in approval. Alana stepped forward, her composure as steady as ever. She turned her piercing gaze toward Michael, then shifted it to Greg, Susan, and Henry. Her voice was calm, yet authoritative, commanding the full attention of everyone present. I am not here to seek revenge, but behavior like this, disdain, discrimination, has no place in the company I own. Susan shuddered at the remark, while Greg stared at the ground, his face flush with guilt. Henry remained motionless, his expression a mixture of regret and shame. Michael turned back to Alana, the respect in his eyes deepening. Ms. Brooks, we are immensely grateful for your patience. I promise you that, starting today, we will do everything in our power to ensure that incidents like this never happen again. Alana gave a small nod, her tone unwavering as she replied, "Thank you, Michael, but apologies alone are not enough. True change requires concrete actions. I hope you and your team understand that." Michael nodded firmly, his voice resolute. "We do, and we will act immediately." His declaration was more than a commitment to Alana. It was a promise to every employee and customer of the airline. He knew that restoring trust would take more than words. It would take action. The tension in the room began to shift. Some employees exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Nearby passengers expressed satisfaction, visibly relieved to see the company take accountability for its mistakes. Before concluding, Michael turned back to Alana, his tone softening but remaining earnest. "Ms. Brooks, you are not just a major shareholder of this company. You are a voice for values that we must uphold. The words you have spoken today will serve as a guiding principle for our future." Alana offered a faint smile, but her eyes held an air of expectation. She knew that words alone would not suffice, and she was determined to follow through to ensure that these promises were kept. The air in the baggage claim area grew heavier after Michael Davis's decisive declaration. Greg Bennett, Susan White, and Henry Miller stood with their heads bowed, fully grasping the gravity of the situation. The eyes of the surrounding staff and passengers no longer held curiosity, but a keen, watchful scrutiny. Turning to face Greg, Susan, and Henry, Michael spoke in a voice that was low yet resolute. "The unprofessional and disrespectful behavior you displayed on today's flight not only hurt a valued customer, but also betrayed the values this company represents. Therefore, I am officially announcing that all individuals involved will be suspended immediately pending an internal investigation." His words struck like a hammer blow, reverberating through the room. Greg's head shot up, panic flashing across his face. "Mr. Davis, I didn't mean to. It was all just a misunderstanding. Michael cut him off, his tone firm and unyielding. "There is no room for excuses, Mr. Bennett. If you fail to understand that respect is the foundation of any service, then this is your opportunity to relearn that lesson." Beside him, Susan tried to maintain her composure, though her face had gone pale. She spoke, her voice trembling. "Mr. Davis, I've been with this airline for years. This is the first time something like this has happened. I truly didn't think I did anything wrong." Michael's gaze shifted to Susan, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Mrs. White, experience is no excuse for tolerating or engaging in unacceptable behavior. As lead flight attendant, you should set the example for others to follow. Instead, you demonstrated blatant bias. That is inexcusable." Susan fell silent, unable to muster another word. Henry Miller, who had remained quiet throughout, finally stepped forward. His voice was low but laden with regret. "I cannot defend my actions. I was wrong not to stand up for my passenger. As a pilot, it is my responsibility to ensure every traveler feels safe and respected. But I failed to do that." Michael gave a slight nod, his tone softening but still stern. "Mr. Miller, your acknowledgement is a first step, but it does not absolve you. You will also be held accountable." The weight of Michael's words left Greg, Susan, and Henry speechless. They understood that any attempt at justification was futile. Their actions had left a scar, not just on Alana, but on the reputation of the airline itself. Alana, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Her voice carried a quiet authority. Suspensions are a first step, but I hope, Mr. Davis, you won't stop there. What happened today isn't just about these three individuals. It reflects a larger problem within a system that has allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Michael nodded, his tone serious. You are absolutely right. That is why we will not stop at investigating and addressing the individuals involved. We will also conduct a comprehensive review of our processes, policies, and workplace culture to ensure this never happens again. His words brought a slight shift in the atmosphere. Some staff nodded in agreement, acknowledging the necessity of his commitment. Greg, still reeling from the shock, muttered, I will change. I truly am sorry. Alana met his gaze, her expression no longer angry but firm. Change starts with action. Let the future prove your words. Susan remained silent, bowing her head, while Henry let out a heavy sigh, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. Standing in the center of the room, Michael concluded with a statement that echoed through the space. I hope today serves as a lesson for all of us. Respect is not optional. It is the standard we must uphold. With that, he stepped through the crowd, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with both gravity and the hope for meaningful change. The atmosphere in the baggage claim area began to settle after Michael Davis's firm declarations. Yet Alana knew that real change could not rest on promises or temporary measures. Stepping forward, she fixed her gaze on Michael with unyielding determination. Mr. Davis, she began, her voice steady and resolute. Suspending staff and launching investigations are necessary actions. But to achieve lasting change, we need to do much more. Michael nodded, inviting her to continue. The behavior I experienced today isn't just the fault of a few individuals. It exposes a much larger gap in the company's culture and policies. We must implement diversity and inclusion training programs, not just for frontline employees, but for everyone, from leadership to the most junior staff. Alana's words struck a chord, silencing the room. The employees gathered nearby began to reflect on the implications of her statement. Greg Bennett and Susan White exchanged nervous glances, while Michael listened intently. Letting out a deep breath, Michael responded, his tone filled with both understanding and determination. I completely agree, Ms. Brooks. That's why we will go beyond temporary solutions. I promise you that starting today, this airline will implement a comprehensive training program to reshape how our employees think and act. Turning to his executive team, he commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Begin immediately. Engage top experts in diversity and inclusion. Design a program that addresses our gaps, and ensure every employee participates, without exception. One of the executives nodded, quickly jotting down notes, their expression a mix of focus and resolve. Michael's tone shifted slightly, carrying a note of warning. And let me be clear, this is not a box-checking exercise. If anyone is unwilling to learn and change, they will have no place in this company. Alana observed the reactions around her. Some employees appeared uneasy, but many showed understanding and agreement. Speaking again, her tone softened, but retained its conviction. This initiative isn't just for those who've made mistakes. It's an opportunity for all of us to learn how to value one another more comprehensively. Diversity isn't a problem to be fixed. It's a strength to be celebrated and leveraged. Henry Miller, standing nearby, raised his head and spoke, his voice heavy with reflection. You're right, Ms. Brooks. As someone who's worked in aviation for years, I see now how often we focus solely on operations and forget the human element. I need to start learning from scratch. Henry's admission added a sense of humility to the moment, softening the tension in the room. A few employees nodded in agreement, their expressions indicating their readiness to embrace change. Michael approached Alana, his eyes reflecting gratitude. Ms. Brooks, your contributions extend far beyond financial support. Your vision and values are invaluable to us. The words you've spoken today will guide us as we create a better, fairer workplace. Alana smiled faintly, her reply steady. Thank you, Mr. Davis, but I'll only feel satisfied when I see these commitments come to fruition. Michael nodded firmly, before turning to address everyone present, his voice carrying the weight of his resolve. We will not stop here. This plan will be enacted immediately, and I expect every one of you to engage with a spirit of learning and responsibility. This isn't just about changing the company. It's about transforming ourselves as individuals. A murmur spread through the room, but it no longer carried judgment or doubt. Instead, it was the sound of quiet agreement, an acknowledgement that this was a pivotal moment for the company's culture. As the room settled into a reflective calm, Alana glanced around, feeling a newfound sense of lightness in her heart. She knew this was just the beginning, but it was a beginning worth believing in. The atmosphere in the baggage claim area grew quiet, not with awkwardness, but with contemplation. It was a silence filled with reflection, as if everyone present was re-examining what had just transpired and considering what they could do to affect change. Alana stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room. She felt the eyes of everyone upon her, some filled with respect, others with introspection. She knew that what had been said today was only the beginning. "Mr. Davis," she began, her voice gentle but resolute, "the commitments you've made are crucial. But we must ensure that those commitments don't remain just words." Michael nodded, his tone steady and sincere. "You're absolutely right, Ms. Brooks. And I assure you, starting today, every decision made within this company will be guided by respect and fairness. These principles will form the foundation of everything we do." A faint smile crossed Alana's face as she turned to Greg, Susan, and Henry, individuals who, she knew, would play vital roles in this change. Her tone softened, yet carried an unmistakable strength. "All three of you have the choice to decide how you view today. This is not an ending. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to change, not just for this company, but for yourselves." Greg looked down awkwardly, managing a small nod. Susan kept her head lowered, her face a mix of regret and unease. Henry, after a moment of thought, lifted his head and spoke earnestly. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for giving me the chance to recognize my mistakes. I won't waste it." Alana nodded, sensing the sincerity in Henry's words. Michael turned to the crowd, his voice strong and commanding. "What happened today is a profound lesson, not just for us, but for the entire aviation industry. From this moment forward, I want everyone in this company to understand that we don't just operate airplanes, we connect people, and that requires the highest standard of respect and empathy." Michael's words were met with nods of agreement from both employees and passengers. Alana addressed Michael once more, her tone lighter but still firm. "I appreciate your candor today, Mr. Davis, but I will be watching closely to ensure that the changes you've promised are truly implemented. Only time will prove the value of these words." Michael responded with a smile of genuine resolve. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Ms. Brooks. Your involvement in this journey is something we deeply value." Alana returned the smile, her eyes reflecting her unwavering determination. She understood that this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone like her, those who had been judged, marginalized, or dismissed because of their appearance or background. Before leaving, she paused briefly, her gaze encompassing the entire room. Then she spoke, her voice calm but resonant. "Respect is not a luxury. It's a fundamental right that everyone deserves. And if we all practice it every day, change is no longer impossible." Her parting words left an indelible mark. Greg, Susan, and Henry lowered their heads in silence. The other employees appeared to be deep in thought, reassessing how they approached their daily responsibilities. Michael accompanied Alana to the exit but stopped at the threshold, watching her as she walked into the brilliant sunlight. He realized she had left not just a reminder, but a new standard for the entire company. As Alana's car rolled away from the airport, she glanced into the rearview mirror, watching the terminal fade into the distance. Yet within her, a sense of hope was growing. She knew that what she had done today was not just about defending her dignity, but was also a step toward building a better future. A future where respect and fairness would no longer be negotiable, but fundamental truths. A week after the shocking incident at the airport, Alana Brooks held a press conference in the airline's Grand Hall. The venue was elegantly arranged, understated yet dignified. Every seat was occupied by reporters and journalists from across the country, representatives from social organizations, and airline employees. Bright lights from the cameras illuminated the stage where Alana was about to speak. Gradually, the murmurs in the audience faded as she stepped up to the podium. Dressed in a crisp white suit, her gaze exuded confidence, her expression calm yet resolute. She began in a voice clear and steady, with a warmth that commanded attention. Today, I stand here not to recount my own story, but to speak about the values that we, as a society, must uphold. The room fell silent, the audience hanging on her every word. Alana continued, "Last week, I experienced something that I know many others have endured before me. It was judgment, discrimination, and disrespect based solely on appearance, skin color, or background. And this must change." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the gazes of those present before pressing on. Respect is never optional. It is a necessity. It is not a gift we bestow on someone. It is something everyone deserves. Her words cast a solemn air over the room. Some in the audience lowered their heads in contemplation, while others nodded in agreement. Alana emphasized that the incident last week was not just a personal ordeal, but an opportunity to address systemic flaws. This airline is not the only company grappling with these issues. They exist everywhere, in businesses, in society, and even in our everyday interactions. Biases creep in, silently eroding the fabric of who we are. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. But today, we have an opportunity to change, and I am committed to ensuring that this airline becomes a symbol of equity and inclusion. We will not just correct past mistakes. We will lead the way in building a better aviation industry. Her declaration was met with resounding applause from the audience. In the front row, Michael Davis nodded in agreement, his eyes reflecting pride and determination. When the applause subsided, Alana concluded with words that carried a powerful weight. None of us can change the past, but together, we can build the future. And I hope that from this day forward, we will do so, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. Her speech was more than just words. It was a call to action. The entire room rose to their feet in applause, not merely to celebrate her message, but to affirm their commitment to the journey of change. As Alana descended from the stage, she was met with admiring gazes from every corner of the room. She knew that today was not the end, but the beginning of a new journey, a journey to transform words into action. As the applause subsided, Michael Davis, the airline CEO, stepped up to the podium. He adjusted his tie, his gaze briefly meeting Alana's before sweeping across the room. His voice was warm yet resolute as it filled the hall. "Ms. Alana Brooks is absolutely right. Respect is never optional, it is imperative. And today, I stand here not just to offer an apology, but to commit to action. This airline will change. We cannot undo the past, but we can and will do better moving forward." Michael's words were met with a focused silence. Journalists prepared to capture his every word, while employees and guests fixed their eyes on him, awaiting the specific steps he was about to outline. He continued, his tone firmer. "After extensive discussions, we have decided to immediately implement a series of initiatives to ensure that this company is not just a workplace, but a space where everyone is respected and valued." Michael paused, looking directly into the cameras as if addressing those watching from afar. "Our commitment extends beyond this company. It is for the aviation industry and for society at large. If we fail to follow through on this, we do not deserve the trust of our customers." Alana, seated in the front row, listened intently. When Michael finished, she stood and approached the podium once more. Speaking slowly but with undeniable authority, she began. "What Mr. Davis has outlined is the right step forward. But let us remember, any plan, no matter how well designed, becomes meaningless without rigorous oversight and execution." She scanned the room, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I will work alongside this company to ensure these promises are kept. Transparency is essential. Unity is essential. And we must act now, Because this is not just the responsibility of one company. It is the responsibility of us all. Michael nodded in agreement before adding, "We are deeply grateful for your partnership, Ms. Brooks. With your guidance, I believe we can not only correct our mistakes, but set a new standard for the aviation industry to follow." Their words sparked a wave of agreement throughout the hall. Journalists immediately began asking questions, not with skepticism, but with genuine interest in the company's plans and vision. As the press conference drew to a close, a young reporter stood and addressed Alana directly. "Ms. Brooks, do you truly believe this change will succeed?" Alana smiled, her voice calm yet resolute. "I believe in tangible actions, and today I see us taking the right steps. But success doesn't come from promises, it comes from sustained commitment. I will be here to ensure that happens." Her words brought the press conference to a powerful conclusion, leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the room. As the press conference approached its final moments, the atmosphere in the hall remained charged with attentiveness. Alana Brooks stepped up to the podium once more, her eyes shining with resolve. This time, her words weren't just for those in the room. They were for the wider community watching through their screens. "Before we conclude today's press conference," she began, her voice calm yet resolute, "I want to deliver a message, not just to those working for this airline, but to all of us living in a world riddled with prejudice and injustice." She paused briefly, her gaze sweeping across the audience, as if to imprint the weight of her words into their minds. Respect is not a privilege. It is not something we grant to a select few whom we deem deserving. Respect is a requirement. It is the fundamental cornerstone of a fair and inclusive society. Her words brought a hush over the room. A few people lowered their heads, seemingly reflecting on the gravity of what she had said. Alana continued, "Throughout my life, I have witnessed countless heartbreaking stories rooted in prejudice and shallow judgment. But I also know this: if we muster the courage to challenge those biases, we have the power to create change." Turning toward Michael Davis, her tone softened but retained its firmness. "What Mr. Davis and this airline have committed to today is a significant step forward. But it is only the beginning. Change does not come from promises. It comes from consistent actions. And I will be here, watching every step of this company's journey to ensure that change becomes reality." She shifted her focus back to the entire hall, raising her voice slightly to ensure her message resonated with everyone. "We must remember that justice is not simply about punishment. Justice is reform. It is rebuilding a system where everyone has an equal opportunity to grow and succeed. It demands accountability and a commitment to rectify the wrongs that have been done." Taking a deep breath, Alana pressed on, her voice now charged with determination. "I urge all of us, not just those in the aviation industry, but everyone listening, to stop judging others based on appearances. Do not let prejudice dictate your actions. Because if you do, that prejudice will not only harm others but also cost you in ways you may not yet realize." The room seemed to hang on her every word. Michael Davis and his team of executives nodded in agreement from their seats. Journalists, accustomed to formulaic press conferences, sat in silence, diligently recording every word. Alana concluded her speech with a heartfelt plea. "Today we have spoken a great deal about change. But change only holds meaning if it spreads. So I hope that what we do here today will not be confined to one company, one industry, or one individual. It must become a movement, a collective commitment from society as a whole, to live with respect and fairness every single day." As Alana stepped down from the podium, the entire hall rose to its feet in applause. The clapping was prolonged and thunderous, not just an acknowledgement of her speech, but an affirmation of the vital message she had delivered. As the press conference drew to a close, the golden hues of the late afternoon sun streamed into the hall, casting a warm and hopeful glow. Alana Brooks stepped outside, a gentle smile gracing her lips. To her, this event was not a personal triumph, but a significant step forward in the journey toward a more equitable future. Reporters and attendees quietly followed Alana as she walked toward the airport's main entrance. A few approached her to shake her hand, offering words of gratitude and congratulations. But Alana refused to be swept up in the praise. She understood that the promises and commitments made today would require time and relentless effort to turn into reality. Michael Davis walked alongside her. Before they parted ways, he said, "Ms. Brooks, I want to thank you, not just for your contributions to the company, but for your courage. What you've done today doesn't just change this airline. It opens a new path for so many others." Alana nodded, her voice steady yet deeply meaningful as she replied, "Thank you, Michael. But we both know that true change only begins when people are ready to act. I hope that what we've started today will inspire others to stand up for what's right." Michael nodded, his eyes reflecting trust and determination. He paused at the doorway, watching as Alana walked away. Outside the airport, a cool breeze swept through, bringing with it a sense of renewal and relief. Alana stopped for a moment, tilting her head back to take in the expanse of the azure sky. In the distance, an airplane ascended, leaving a white contrail stretching across the heavens. The sight made her smile. It felt like a symbol of new beginnings, of a future where everyone could soar, no matter where they came from or how they appeared. A wave of hope surged through her. She knew her story wouldn't end here. It would serve as a catalyst for her continued fight for the values she believed in: justice, respect, and unity. She stepped into the waiting car, but before closing the door, she turned back to look at the airport building. Michael and a few staff members still stood there, watching her departure. Alana whispered softly, as if to herself, "Never stop believing in change." The car rolled away, leaving behind the image of Alana etched in the minds of those who had witnessed her resolve. A resilient woman who dared to stand up, not only for her own dignity, but for the countless voices that had yet to be heard. The story of Alana Brooks reflects the harsh reality of prejudice and discrimination that still lingers in our society today. Too often, we unconsciously judge others based on their appearance or background rather than seeing their true worth. To bring about change, each of us must cultivate empathy, practice respect, and remain open to learning about diversity. We must listen more, resist making hasty conclusions, and be willing to make amends when we realize we're wrong. Change begins with the smallest, yet most meaningful actions in our daily lives. Actions that carry the power to reshape how we see and treat one another. This is just the beginning. What do you think about how Alana handled the situation? Share your thoughts, hit the subscribe button, and stay tuned for more inspiring and unexpected stories on our channel.